Growing up in my household was extremely toxic. It felt like I was on the battlefield, just waiting for the ball to drop, always on defense, waiting for the next argument or for me to do something that pisses somebody off. And on top of that, my mom had me when she was just 13, 14 years old, and my dad was well into his 20s, and I think fresh out of prison. They didn't really tell me anything about themselves unless it was to guilt trip me or to get me to feel bad for them. Getting to know my parents was like putting together puzzle pieces. They would tell me bits and pieces of information, and sometimes they would even lie about it, and then I would hear other things from different family members or other people who knew them before I was born and all of these other things. So I was kind of putting their story together by getting puzzle pieces from everybody else. But yeah, my dad was well into his 20s when my mom got pregnant with me at 14 years old. He's not on my birth certificate, and there is a huge gap between him and my mom. I think my mom's like 30 something now and he's pushing 60, so they're still together and they shouldn't be, but you can tell from that dynamic that it was a recipe for disaster to begin with. My mom always felt this hatred, anger, and resentment towards me. I never felt love from her. I never felt like she really cared about me. It was always just this cold, angry, mean look on her face. I was more closer with my dad growing up because he was more the emotional one, and I would always go to him whenever I had problems with my mom because he was the only one that would show emotions. My mom was completely emotionally detached. Like, she genuinely just, I don't think she knew how to show love. And me and my dad bonded over the mutual fact that we were both taking our mom's shit. Like, he wasn't exempt from that. Whenever they would both get into an argument, I was put in the middle of it, and then everybody's unhappy. Because when my mom was pissed off or in some sort of fight or argument, she would ignore everybody. She would slam things, throw things around, roll her eyes, walk around stomping, pissed off. She would be on the phone with her friends or anybody who would listen, quite honestly, and be talking shit about you right in front of your face to just get a reaction out of you. She wanted to fight somebody. She wanted somebody to put her hands on her. Like, even us. Like, she would challenge me when I was 12 to 15 years old. Fight me, beat my ass, try to fight me. And I'm like, girl, I'm not trying to fight you. Like, I just want to be in peace. And it was always a battle with her. It was always an argument, and nobody wanted to get on her bad side, including my dad. Whenever me and my mom got into a fight, we would both go to him and complain to him and tell him our side of the story, of course, on separate occasions, and then he would play sides. He would tell her one thing, and then he would tell me, like, oh, I know, just be the bigger person, you know how your mom is. Or he would use his emotions to emotionally manipulate and say things like he was so stressed out that me and my mom are gonna give him high blood pressure. He would threaten to unalive himself and just put that emotional burden and that guilt and that shame on me that made me grow up and be the bigger person and go to my mom and apologize, or just allow all of the things that she was doing to just be swept under the rug. That's what my dad was very good at. He was very good at playing both sides, sweeping things under the rug until he quite literally couldn't anymore, and things would just blow up, and it would turn into this huge argument, huge fight. Like, when I was 12, me and my mom got into it because I was continuing a generational curse with talking to older men. I had never felt any love from my household, like I said, so I went looking for it, and I found it in all of the wrong places. And when my mom found out, it turned into this huge battle, and it ended up with me being in the hospital, bruises all over my arms, CPS and detectives in and out of the hospital all damn day. I was in there the entire day just talking to people and telling them what happened, telling them how unsafe that I felt with my mom and how this is just a normal for me, honestly. It didn't feel like anything out of the ordinary. And when that situation happened, they placed the sole responsibility on me. They tried to make it seem like I was just this rebellious teenager who didn't want to listen or follow the rules, or like I hated my family or anything like that. That's the picture that they painted to other people. And when I got in the car, because my aunt had to pick me up because I think they took my parents to jail. It was on the news and they had posted about it, and they took my parents to jail, and then my aunt picked me up, and when I was in the car, she had my dad on the phone, and he was telling me all of these things about how I'm ruining the family, and he didn't know that I hated my mom this much, and he can't understand why I'm doing this. And then he would start crying, and then I would start crying, and I would feel really bad, and it was just emotionally fucking me up because I felt like I was genuinely a bad person. I felt extremely bad that me and all of my siblings had to just leave with a CPS worker, a stranger, and go an hour away from our home to this group home, to the shelter where we knew nobody, and it was all my fault. I had to sit there and watch my siblings crying over their parents, and then my mom and dad telling them like it's okay, and then looking at me as the disappointment. And then my whole entire family knew about it because my mom was calling and telling them all of these harsh things about me. Nobody asked me how I felt about the situation. Nobody asked me about what I was going through. They just believed the narrative that my mom painted about me to them, and nobody really questioned it. And at that point, my mental health had gotten so bad. I was already feeling depressed and anxious and sad, and now they had just taken the only love and validation that I had. I was emotionally fucked up because I was so attached to these men. If I didn't have a man in my life, the grown-ass man in my life, telling me that I was beautiful, I would legit look in the mirror and say that I hated myself. I would pick apart every single square inch of my body because that's exactly what my parents did. That's how they treated me. They genuinely made me hate myself and hate who I was. So in this video, I want to share with you how growing up in a toxic, abusive environment affected my mental health, and how eventually I realized that I wasn't actually the problem. I wasn't crazy. I was just reacting out of survival mode to an unhealthy environment. And I know a lot of you can probably reflect upon your own trauma and relate. So if you've ever felt like there was anything wrong with you, or like you were going crazy, or you were too sensitive or too emotional, or you just blamed yourself for the things that you did in survival mode, then this video is for you. If you're new here, hi, hello, my name is Shira Divine, and I am on a mission to lead an inner revolution, because once you change yourself, you change the world. And my content is mainly centered around becoming the best version of yourself, stepping into your power as a co-creator of your life, healing from all of the trauma and limitations that were placed on you by family, by society, by your environment. I have spent the past 5 years since I was 15 years old studying quantum physics, law of attraction, manifestation, esoteric concepts, going on my own healing journey, learning a lot of things at a really young age because I had to grow up really fast. I had to take care of myself really fast. And so I'm using my knowledge, my lived experience, my trauma, and everything that I've learned, all of the research that I have learned along my journey, to give to you guys and to help you guys. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment down below, introduce yourself, or if you feel called to, share your story in the comments. This is a safe space to do so. And with that being said, let's get back into the video. I always questioned why I was born into a family that didn't love, support, or care about me. I wasn't allowed to express myself, have opinions, or speak up without being punished, so I internalized everything. And over time, I began to feel like I was fundamentally flawed, like there was something wrong with me because my pain was never acknowledged or validated. And because I didn't understand that my environment was unhealthy, I adapted in the only way that I knew how. I went into survival mode. And by the time I was 15, I was extremely on edge, anxious, and emotionally overwhelmed. And around the time when I was 15 years old, that's also when my parents had abandoned me. Me and my mom got into this huge fight over my state ID because I had asked my dad instead of her to take me to my appointment, and when I realized that he couldn't because he wasn't on my birth certificate, I had to ask my mom like the day before. She agreed to take me, and then the day of, right when I'm coming downstairs, I'm all ready, I have everything, ready to go, I'm telling her what she needs to bring. She tells me that she's not going to take me because me and my dad never tell her anything. And I'm like, what? I'm like, girl, what do you mean? Like, I just asked him first, and then I told you everything, and then you said yes, and then now you're saying no because you're being petty, because you think that me and my dad are just, what? I always went to him for things because I already told you, he was more the emotional one, he was the more easily approachable one. So my mom got all pissed off, and then my dad and her started arguing, and then I got put into the middle of it. So I went upstairs and I started packing my things because we had just moved to Michigan from Texas, and I was previously in a whole bunch of trouble for my mom finding out that I was dating a man who was much, much older than me, and that's a whole nother story for a whole different time. But I started packing my stuff because now that I lived in Michigan, my dad's kids were there, and they were much older. They were like in their late 20s, early 30s, so I was going to go stay with them until the whole situation blew over because I was pissed. And I just didn't want to be in the house because they were arguing in it. Again, like I said, the arguments weren't just small little arguments, they were full-on battles. My mom mom was walking out, slamming doors, threatening to leave my dad. My dad was sitting there saying that he was gonna unalive himself, and he was sitting there crying, and I just felt genuinely responsible, and I was sitting there asking him like, no, don't do that, like, do you need me to stay with you? I'll stay with you. And he's like, no, it's okay, go ahead, I have to watch your little siblings and everything. So it just made me feel really bad. I felt bad about even leaving the house. And then when I was at the house, I tried to call my mom and be like, hey, dad's saying that he wants to unalive himself, like, can you just go back and talk to him, please? Like, I'm sitting there trying to get into the middle of it and blow this whole situation over, and it just turned into this crazy thing. I ended up staying with the relatives way longer than I was supposed to, and when I went back to try to go get something from the house, me and my mom got into a physical altercation. She was literally on top of me, beating the shit out of me, and then she shoved me out the door, and from that point forward I was like, fuck this. Fuck this. I had glass all in my hand. She was calling me a bitch and a hoe and saying fuck me and all these things, and I was screaming back at her, and I was just done. At that point I was done. So I went and I filed a police report, and I was telling them everything, and my dad's kids had went with me, and they were pretty much on my side and in full support because they knew how my parents were. And when I had filed the police report, my dad was also guilt tripping me and saying, oh, well, I just want to let you know that I love you, and like, I just don't understand why you're doing this. And he was crying and visibly upset, and then I was crying again. And so it was just, yeah, like I said, this whole situation, and I had never ended up going back home after that. Yet another CPS case was opened, and the whole ordeal started over again. So when I was 12, that was when the first one happened. My parents legit went to jail, and then a couple years passed by. I'm 15 years old. They decide to move to Michigan, and then shortly after moving to Michigan, I get into another CPS case, and then I'm living with other relatives. And from that point, that's when the other relatives offered to take me in, and I don't think that they were really equipped to deal with how much complex trauma that I had, and it just wasn't working out because they had their own problems, they had their own things going on, and my dad's side of the family was pretty much the same. They didn't really talk about anything. They kind of just blamed, reacted, and pointed fingers at each other, and it was also a form of a toxic environment. It wasn't as toxic as my household, but it was still toxic nonetheless, and I had a ton of things that I was dealing with. I was still talking to older men, still relying on them for emotional validation. That was pretty much like my lifeline. I was holding on to it like a freaking crush because I genuinely felt like that's the only love that I had in my life. And I'm not very proud of this moment, but whenever they had closed out the CPS case because there wasn't enough evidence of physical abuse, then I had lied about my dad SAing me, so just so that I could stay out of the house. That's how bad I did not want to go back there. Whenever my sister had told me that I had to go back home, I genuinely felt my heart sink down to my stomach. I was like, there's no way that I can go back and deal with this. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I was sitting there contemplating on even saying anything because I knew that it was wrong. I knew that it was bad, but I also knew that I had to do something. And so I went and I told the worker, and it didn't even end up working anyways because I went back to my mom's house and they had just removed my dad from the house. And whenever my family found out that I had lied about it, of course they were extremely upset and disappointed about it, rightfully so. And my mom was really angry. I didn't even last a day going back to my mom's house because she was extremely violent, extremely hostile. She would sit by the door and mock me. She would do the thing where she would talk to people on the phone and talk shit about me, and I was just trying to get out of there any way that I could, and the only way that I knew she would let me out of that house is if I did something. So I went into the bathroom and I self-harmed so that she would call the police on me, and I could tell them that I didn't feel safe in the household, I didn't feel safe with her, and they would just take me somewhere else. And as soon as she saw that I had did that, she got pissed. She grabbed my arm, she threw me on the floor, she poured a bunch of alcohol on the wound and started scrubbing it with tissue and toilet paper. And then when the cop came, I was just like shaken. I had to go in the other room and tell him like, please just get me out of here. And they had taken me to a group home, and that's when they had diagnosed me with CPTSD, anxiety, and depression, and then they put me on medication. And around this time was when I started studying law of attraction and manifestation. I had stumbled upon the information just scrolling on my computer. My mom had dropped me off at my papa's house, and I was just looking on YouTube, and the first video that I found was actually how to make a potion or a spell jar so that you can protect your energy. And I wanted to do that so that I could protect myself from my mom's negative energy. That's how much I felt her anger and her hatred towards me. And so I was in the kitchen, legit mixing up any herbs that they had, anything that I could find. I would beg my papa to take me to the dollar store so I could buy some things, and then I would make these little sprays, and then I would spray it all over myself, and then hope that when my mom came to pick us up, like, it would work, or she would just like leave me alone or something. And then it just so happened that my papa's niece was very spiritual, and so she ended up taking me to my first metaphysical crystal shop, and I fell in love. I was like, oh my gosh, yes. I really liked the fact that I could go in there and pick crystals and set my intentions with them. So I started doing that also. Even while I was in the group home, I remember getting a journal and doing the 369 method, writing down, I'm out of my house and I'm living with my sister. I'm out of my house and I'm living with my sister, because my other side of the family, my dad's side of the family, had still offered to take me in, and I was calling them, giving them updates. And so I was writing that down 20, 30, 50 times. And then I was talking to my therapist, and she even bought me like a little pin that was a microphone so that I could record what my mom was doing, or at least what she was saying to me, so that I would have some sort of evidence. But everything started to completely change when I became homeless at 17 years old. I got kicked out by the last relative that I could have stayed with. I was staying with her for a couple of years, and we had actually developed a pretty close relationship. It was starting to get very rocky because, like I said, I was going through so much complex trauma at the time. I was still dealing with an active CPS case. I was in an abusive relationship where he treated me like absolute dog shit. I was completely stressed out, and I was just not the best person at the time, but I did a lot of shit that I wasn't proud of and that upset them. And so I can understand why they felt like they were at their limits with me, because I was very hard to deal with. But the way that I got kicked out was just extremely insane. The relative had ended up throwing all my shit out in the garage, and I was now homeless at 17 years old. And let me know if you guys want a story time on that. I'm not gonna go too much into it in this video because I want to get to the point, but it was crazy and it deserves its own story time. So let me know down in the comments if you guys would like to hear the story time about how I became homeless at 17 years old. And not only did she kick me out, she shoved me out of the window. And when I fell to the ground, you guys, it had felt like I was going through war. I had just had the final boss fight on the battlefield, and I'm still victorious, I'm still standing, but I'm fucking defeated. I had felt like it was back to back to back. And it's so crazy because it aligns with the year of the snake and this fire horse year that we're moving into. For the past 9 years, I've been going through shit, through complete hell since 2017. That's when the first CPS case had started, and then it was just like back to back to back to back. And then boom, I'm 17 years old, homeless, I'm laying flat down in the dirt, and I'm like, fuck this. I was extremely hurt, and it was the worst pain that I had ever felt in my life. I would not wish it on my worst enemy. It was a physical representation of how I had felt my whole entire life. Lost, alone, misunderstood. I felt hated. This is when I started to look at my family from an outsider's perspective. I started to reflect on all of my experiences now that I didn't have anybody in my ear telling me that I was wrong or crazy or stupid or a bitch or anything like that. I was finally by myself, and it was silent, and I got to just sit down with all of the trauma that I had been through since 12 years old. And at that point, I just knew that I was separated for a reason. I just knew that this was happening for a reason. I still continued my journey of law of attraction, manifestation, learning all of these things. The relative that I was staying with actually was also spiritual, and so we would watch all of these documentaries together. I watched The Secret, read all these books, was doing a lot of work and shadow work and inner healing. And so by the time I was 17 years old, I was like, okay, This had to have happened for a reason. I was separated for a reason. And I had gotten kicked out just when I started to do social media too. It's so crazy. I had written down in my manifestation journal that I wanted to have a following, a community, and pursue social media. I got a reading from a tarot reader, a family tarot reader, that had encouraged me to pursue that journey. And so I had just started that journey whenever I had gotten kicked out, and I was like, oh, bet. I was like, oh, bet, it's on. I'm just going to share I felt called to share my story and speak about all my experiences. I didn't stop creating content. If you guys check out my TikTok page that will be linked down in the description, you can scroll to the bottom of my page or even look at one of my previous YouTube videos and you will see I was posting. I was at the library with my phone that had no cell service. I was in there making videos, sharing my story, and posting about it. And the craziest thing happened. As soon as I was separated from my family, my life actually started to get better. Even though I was still upset, hurt, and angry, blessings started to pour in. I found a supportive community that treated me better than my own family, and they opened up doors for me and gave me access to tons of resources that I didn't even know that was available to me. It provided me with the safety, shelter, and stability to start actually thinking about what I wanted out of life. And the story is so crazy, so I'm just gonna tell you guys how everything ended up working out for me. So whenever me and this relative got into an argument, my friend, my best friend at the time, just so happened to be staying with us, and she saw the whole shit go down. It was crazy, you guys. It was like, you wouldn't even believe it if I told you, but the argument was crazy and it just came from nothing. It came from nowhere because I left a dish on the table and then it spiraled into, oh, you're spiraling, you're smoking too much, I just care about you, I don't want nothing to happen to you. But she set 3 bags of weed on my bed the day prior. But yet I'm spiraling and I'm smoking too much. The argument just didn't make sense to me, and I told her that. I was like, this is not making any sense. Like, where is this coming from? I normally always do my dishes. My room was like the cleanest room in that house. She knew that I wasn't a dirty person and that I would clean up after myself, so I just couldn't understand where the argument was coming from, and it felt very deliberate. And so she had ended up making this whole scene, and so I'm like, fuck this, I'm trying to leave. She wanted me to leave so bad. I'm like, you know what, I'm not. She was like, oh, when you're 18 you need to get out. And I was like, 18? I'm about to just leave right now. And so I started grabbing all of my stuff, and my friend was just sitting there like, what the hell? She wouldn't let me leave, but she let my friend leave, and she was like saying that she's gonna call my worker and that my parents were right about me after I sat down and told her all of my trauma. And she was saying things like, I can't believe your parents would do something like that. She would constantly blast my mom on Facebook, and then she would say, there's parents who children literally unalive people and they're still with them. Like, I just don't understand how they could do something like that. And then she turns around and throws all of that shit back up in my face, and she's like, oh, you're crazy, your mom was right about you, I'm calling your worker, and da 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 da. And I'm like taken aback, blown back, because she was saying all of these things about me being accepted into the family. I felt like a daughter to her, and it just, yeah, that was just extremely shocking. And so I had ended up grabbing all of my stuff, and then she shoved me out the window and then threw all of my shit in the garage. My friend's mom had ended up picking both of us up. She tried to reconcile the situation with my sister, but she couldn't. And even when she took me back in there, because my sister had texted me and she's like, I'm calm, you can come back now. And I'm like, you're calm? You just shoved me out the fucking window. What do you mean you're calm? I can come back. And so my friend's mom was like, just don't say anything, be the bigger person like I've always been, and just walk in there and just don't say anything. So I'm like, okay. My friend comes with me, we walk in, I don't say anything, boom, as soon as I walk in the door, I called the cops on you, you're crazy, you put your hands on me, you knocked out my window. And she's following me around saying all of these things. So I'm trying my best to ignore her. I'm walking into my room, I'm trying to grab everything that I can remember, and while I'm trying to think of what I need, she's sitting there in the doorway calling me crazy and psychotic, I need to be locked up in a mental institution. And I just sit there and I look at her like, girl, if you want to have an adult conversation, then talk to me like an adult. I'm not crazy, I'm not psychotic. You literally threw all of my shit out in the garage and I have nowhere to go, and you're telling all of these lies saying that I broke your window when I just knocked out the screen protector. Like, you're you're in the wrong. You're clearly in the wrong. And this time she let me leave. And then once I left, my friend's mom had referred me to Ozone. Me and my friend called. I got put on the wait list. It just so happened that my friend worked at hotel rooms. She got me discounts. She was old enough to get the hotel rooms because I was still a minor and I couldn't do shit. I couldn't even get cell phone service if I wanted to, and it was one of my rock bottoms. I went into work crying. I was coming home crying. I was spending the nights crying. But while I was crying, I was also getting clarity. I was sitting down making vision boards and thinking about my dreams and what I wanted for my life. One day when I go into work, a CPS worker contacts me and she tells me that because I'm a minor, I have to go somewhere. Like I can't just stay in hotel rooms by myself. And that's when I told her that me and my friend had called Ozone House, and then she actually ended up calling in there and getting me in there within the week when the wait list was originally full and closed. And then I now had 18 months of free shelter and pretty much all of my basic needs taken care of. The program is called Ozone House, and it's the best and only program for youth homelessness in Washtenaw County. And that's when I started to realize that I wasn't given the safety, the emotional support, and stability that a child needs to develop that healthy sense of self. I'm the problem, and I got removed from the equation, and the problem still exists, and in fact, it gets worse. Who's the common denominator? And this awareness allowed me to finally stop blaming myself and start healing, stepping into my power and discovering who I actually am outside of my trauma. That realization didn't erase the pain overnight, but it helped me to finally begin to start healing and have compassion for myself. I started to no longer resonate with having CPTSD, depression, and anxiety. My symptoms were no longer present because I was removed from the source of the problem. That's why a lot of people say you can't heal in the same environment that traumatized you. I started talking to other people, sharing my story more with the staff members and therapists, and I started to realize that what I went through wasn't normal. It was chaotic, and I didn't deserve any of the shit that I got. I didn't deserve all of that pain that I went through. And while I was in this program, I actually quit my 9-to-5s and I started my own business called Planet Divinity. I started posting online, I started a podcast, and I was really consistent with it because my spirit and my soul just felt called to share my story and share all of the knowledge and the wisdom that I had gained through my research and my lived experience. And that actually ended up leading to me being on the Dr. Phil show. And then when that happened, it was like, boom. I think my whole family had seen it, and a lot of people, including the relative who threw all my shit out, ended up coming back and apologizing. And shortly after being on the show, I got my own car, my own apartment, I was working my way towards financial stability, and I was just in a really good place in life. And I was just reflecting on my experience earlier, and I was like, damn, like I'm really living in a previous version of myself manifestation. I've always just wanted the space to just be myself. I wanted a safe, nurturing environment to just express my creativity, and I never got that. And now I'm giving myself that opportunity. I signed up for college. I'm taking acting and film classes, which I really love. I joined the dance team. As a child, I've always wanted to dance, and I just never did because I didn't have the time to. I was in survival mode. I didn't have time to go to school. My parents didn't have money to give me stuff for extracurricular activities, and now I just get to pay for that for myself. I get to take classes and do what I enjoy. I'm making new friends, I'm enjoying new hobbies, and I'm just genuinely at such a good place in my life. I set up a system for myself to do my work schedule, and I'm manifesting my dream life. I'm actually feeling like I'm in alignment with all of my wildest dreams, and it's just such a good feeling, and I never thought that I would be here. I genuinely didn't know how I was going to get out of my rock bottom, but I did. I don't carry resentment towards my parents or my family anymore. I share my story out of compassion and truth because my inner child deserves justice for everything that she went through. I deserve justice for everything that was swept under the rug, the pain that no one noticed, the wounds that no one bothered to see, and the battles that I fought alone. And so do you. So if you've been holding back your truth, I want to let you know that it's okay to speak up. Your truth deserves to be brought to light. Your feelings deserve to be acknowledged. Your voice matters, and your story is important. And if my story has told you anything, let it be this: you are not alone.